Hey, first time I've done one of these in a while. Looking at some recent weather, some future weather, asking how the heck is there a snail kite on Lake Erie? It's the time of year we get big storms. Some seem to bring birds, some seem to not bring birds. Obviously, something has happened if we have snail kites and common ground doves and least terns on the Great Lakes. What I usually like to do is just sort of start some historical weather maps at the time said bird is observed. So here's the morning of snail kite on Lake Erie day. I like to look sort of where did this pocket of air come from? It's on the warm side of a big cold front that's dipping far down into the south. I find this one in particular, and maybe this is true of really, really insane, unprecedented vagrants. I kind of think there may actually be a multi-day kick involved. If we trace this pocket back, we end up in North Texas. If we follow it forwards a day, we end up in the Great Lakes. So it seems obvious that snail kite probably didn't come from North Texas. Um, if we just go back a little bit further, there's a lot of stuff at play here where we actually have a tropical storm in the Gulf, and I can't tell you how many times I've traced back a rare bird to essentially see a tropical system in this part of the world. I assume it has something to do with them sensing disturbance that we are not capable of sensing through the atmosphere and fleeing. There's a few cases of this, including this flamingo that seemed to be in St. Mark's that flew to Tennessee before a tropical storm approached this fall. But anyways, I assume this storm knocked the bird out of place, and you could arbitrarily call this sort of like a multi-kick event to bring a bird like a snail kite to the Great Lakes. But you go out, it heads out across the Carolinas and out to sea. So it's not directly responsible, but if we have a snail kite that somehow came up from the southern Gulf and ended up in this part of the world, possibly flying into the center of this low pressure, is the air, if it's following the breeze, would end up in this part of the world. This low actually pretty quickly phases with this low, so you'll see it disappear and the frontal boundary will extend, so the air will kind of rapidly head towards this storm. So you can kind of see it disappear actually on the very next frame. So suddenly now the air is going to keep flowing further into this low. And if you follow this quadrant forwards again, this is the one that actually ends up pretty much right over Pennsylvania, morning of said snail kite occurrence. So can't really say 100% for sure. That one seems likely to me just because there's such a direct correlation. I think this time of year in particular, obviously some storms don't necessarily seem to bring birds, but you reach a point where after you've had 4 or 5 of these big monsters pass through the Great Lakes, birds just end up in weird places. If we go back 7 days, where we start talking about this storm in the Gulf, and maybe that's the source of a snail kite, this same day there's actually a laughing gull found in Timmins and a white ibis found in Aurelia. So obviously birds have been displaced prior to that. So I think especially this time of year, this late October, early November window, if we've had 4 or 5 storms that have all brought 1 or 2 or 3 interesting birds, suddenly we're 15 birds up, and it's when things get found. So yeah, just a little bit of reverse weathering. Going forwards, I actually sort of see a lot of craziness in our future as well. Current news is Tropical Storm Olga just recently formed in the Gulf. It's likely going to go post-tropical in a real hurry, but if we just zip forward a bit, we'll see that essentially by Sunday morning, it's centered over the Great Lakes. So a lot of tropical moisture associated with this. Obviously, has potential to bring birds. This little feature is quite interesting to me too, in the sense that we have air, just north of Texas, and 12 hours later, it's essentially passing through the Great Lakes again. So it doesn't even have a defined center of low pressure, but it's zipping through, and fast-moving air can likely bring birds. I think especially when it's cold in the west, if anything is fleeing the snow and decides to just sort of go with the flow, it's going to end up in the Great Lakes overnight. And then the last one that really been keeping an eye on, both the GFS now and the Euro for a few days have been highlighting it, just another absolute sort of monstrosity of a low pressure system right through the southern Great Lakes. So this sort of ties into the fact where tracing birds can be hard, and sometimes you get a lot of really mixed messages where you think, oh, I wonder where that snail kite showed up, and then you hear king eider seen on Lake Huron right around the same time, and you think, well, how is that possible? How do they both end up sort of out of place right around the same time? Probably one of the big factors is that these things, the air flows into the center of low pressure. So essentially in the southeast quadrant, you'll have southerly winds. To the northeast, you get northeast winds coming down the St. Lawrence into the Great Lakes. And then you've got cold air essentially coming from the center of the continent up into the Great Lakes. So being near the center is obviously a pretty good place to be, since that's where all the air flows. And I do think that's how you end up with these weird situations where, if this comes to pass, you might have a whole bunch of Franklin's gulls. And again, seen right around the same time. So it's exciting time of year. Go birding, and yeah, have a good one.